Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to our audio event explaining technical debt to non-technical stakeholders and why it's crucial. My name is Matthew Brown, but everybody calls me Matty, and I'm a marketing executive here at Actionable Digital. We're a digital product studio based in the northeast of England, in Newcastle. With over 20 years in the digital space, we research, design and build better digital products and services faster for startups and SMEs. Often working in the shadows, technical debt can be a silent saboteur for your digital product. It can rear its head as add time pressure, a starting point for security threats, or a blocker to integrate in your systems. But if you keep your eyes open for where it starts, you can keep on top of its obstructive influence and increase your flexibility to make sure you and your team deliver all aspects of your product efficiently. Hopefully there'll be a range of both technical and non-technical people here at our event. To get ahead of technical debt, you're going to need to work together. So on that note, today I'm joined by Scott Salisbury, our head of web development here at Actionable Digital. And together we're going to be digging into technical debt to give you strategies to cope with it, break down communication challenges, and how we can collaborate better to deal with technical debt. Just a quick note before we get underway. Unfortunately, Andy Greener, our founder, won't be able to make it today, but he sends his best and he will be listening in. So, without further ado, I'll hand you over to Scott to introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Cheers, hello everyone. I'm Scott, I'm Head of Web Development at Actionable Digital. I've worked in the industry, I think, for 10 to 15 years now. And over the years I've built, managed, designed and led various projects with varying complexity. And I think one thing that we've all had, that all of these projects have had in common is definitely technical debt.
Great, Scott. So, to start us off, let's get everybody on the same page. How would you define technical debt, and why is it crucial for everyone involved in the product development process to understand it?
That's a great question to start off with. It's probably worth just talking a little bit about what technical debt actually is. There's a few analogies I like to use to start off. I think the first one is it's a little bit like, it's just like taking shortcuts when you're building like a house. So quite often technical debt can be a decision. Someone has made a decision somewhere to save time, to save money, to do something quicker. So with a house, you might be choosing to use cheaper resources, cheaper materials, that sort of stuff. And I think sometimes that can be fine. Those decisions can be justified, and a lot of the time I think is just the most important thing is to make sure there's a plan to go back and deal with it, to rectify those things, to review it, because in the case of a house or a building, it might collapse if you've built everything on sand or whatever. And it's exactly the same in software. If you cut corners, if you don't use the best practices, everything might be working fine for now and everyone's happy, but in the long run it will lead to bugs, performance issues, difficulty adding features, limited flexibility and all that kind of thing. And the other analogy I like to use is, I always like to say with tech debt, you have to pay it back eventually. So it's a little bit like a credit card. It's a bit having like debt on a credit card or something like that. It's perfectly fine to have some debt on a credit card, and it's not going to hurt that much in the short term. But if you leave it for too long and ignore it, it's gonna bite pretty hard. I think that is kind of the textbook answer for tech debt, which I think a lot of people would probably expect me to say. But I think also in my experience, at least personally, all software eventually becomes tech debt eventually. And I find that quite reassuring because it doesn't have to be perfect. You might be writing a bit of code that is not totally ideal, but it means you don't have to strive for perfection because it's probably going to get replaced or deprecated soon anyway. I know that's definitely been the case for a lot of the software that I've worked on over the last 10 years. And I think sometimes, a lot of the time, tech debt can be a decision, or it can be specific to save some time, but also even if you're working with out-of-date technologies and libraries, things like that, then even it could be that the code that you're writing right now is already tech debt before you've even finished. But that can be still fine as long as it's justified and there's a plan to rectify it in the future.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I was actually doing a little bit of research before we jumped on the event today, and I was reading in Stripe's developer coefficient report. 42% of every developer's working week is spent dealing with technical debt. That's 13 and a half hours over the course of a working week, and that is going to come back to bite you. And I actually love the analogy you make about it being a credit card. Is you can take a risk. If you have 0% interest for a set term on a credit card, it's okay to use it, but you've got to have a plan to pay that back in the long run. And I think using analogies like that can be quite powerful. And that brings me on to the first thing I really wanted to get into with you is why is communication. So why do you think communicating technical debt is essential for the overall success of a digital product?
Yeah, no, I think the main the top reason for that, I think, is to allow everyone, the whole team, the company, the stakeholders, to just make informed decisions, especially when it's around decisions on when it's okay to accrue technical debt and when it's time to start paying it back. And I think that's why everyone should be having healthy conversations to figure all of that out. And I think it's worth talking about as well as like some areas where it's probably okay to make a decision to accrue technical debt, and that might be for startups or anyone like that who's trying to get a quick entry to market and need to beat potential competitors, or maybe they're working on a proof of concept and they just want to test that something's working. There's no point trying to build this perfect solution that is completely free of tech debt and is going to last 20 years if it's not even a proven concept. And also sometimes you don't have the benefit of having the luxury of having everything perfect. Sometimes you've just got to work with what you've got. You might have limited resources. You might not have the skills in-house, and so it's okay to accept a little bit of tech debt here. Again, just with a plan to review that and come back to it. And I think the other one is deciding when it's time to start paying it back. And I think the main one is scalability. If you're planning on doing scaling out really like big, you might have a system that works perfectly fine for 1,000 users, but the long-term goals is to get to 5,000. Your dev team probably already is well aware that you've got some code somewhere that's not going to handle that much extra capacity. So you should start talking about addressing some of those things and finding weak spots and fixing it and prioritizing it. The other thing as well is if you're noticing a lot of instability, is the application going down quite a lot at the weekends? Is the dev team spending more time on hot fixes and dealing with regressions? Those might all be signals that it's time to look at some tech debt. Also, if you're planning on building any new features, again, instead of stacking new functionality on a house built on sand, it might be time to look at that and stabilize the foundations a little bit. Yeah,
and I think if you're not communicating that, it is eventually going to hurt, like you say. And really just wanted to know how a lack of understanding about technical debt can derail a project, and what's really going to hurt if you don't have a handle on it.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong and for things to derail. I think the main one there is just the risk of continuing to accumulate the tech debt, especially if people aren't really aware of what it is or how to communicate it or how to identify it. If you've one of the things I always sort of try and think about with code bases is if you've already got a code base or a project that's in a bad state, it's in a bad health, that sets a precedent for continuing to write new features in that same way. So you might have some tech debt there that is being copied and pasted around, and it's worth trying to catch that and capture that. And if people aren't having healthy conversations about that, then it's just going to get worse, and then eventually you're going to end up with a product that is 10 years old, and everyone's terrified to make any changes to it because it might all just fall over. Then you're in quite a serious problem at that stage. And I think other risks is just the overall slower development pace. I think one of the things I see quite a lot in the software development world is you might have a non-technical stakeholder or a manager or something like that who's trying to get a new feature built. It might be something really simple, It could be just 3 days worth of work or something, but it's not 3 days. It's taken 3 weeks and it hasn't been finished, and everyone's getting a bit upset and frustrated because someone might say, well, we've built this feature on one of our other products and it was really easy, so what's taken the time? And then it starts raising questions about, is there something wrong with that particular individual? Is there something wrong with training? And those might be true, but actually it could, more often than not, I say it's just because people are wrestling with tech debt that nobody has been talking about in their, that developers ended up having to rewrite a whole bunch of modules and rewrite some back-end code that they weren't expecting to do to get this thing built. And that can be a problem because you might not have been expecting to rectify tech debt in that moment because you're trying to get some new features out, but that's the reality, and it can be very stressful for the team. And I think the other one as well is just on that point is decreased team morale. If you've got a project that is absolutely stacked to the brim full of tech debt and you're completely bogged down, it's just going to be miserable for the dev team to work on it. Nobody's going to be happy. It could increase the staff turnover, so you can't keep the stable team for very long. So it is more often than not just worth listening to the dev team and see what's causing those issues, because you may not realize it, but your dev team might actually be trying to save your business. So that's all kind of good stuff to be having a conversation with, and then ultimately that leads to business risk. So you might think it's okay to ignore a dev team that is complaining about some stuff. You might just think that they're complaining, they're just they're never happy. So why do I need to worry about that? But ultimately there's indirect and direct risk that could be caused from technical debt. So you might think, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll just hire some more developers for the team. But if you can't keep a stable team there, then eventually productivity is going to be low, and it will eventually affect the bottom line.
I really like the link that you've made there between the sort of the moral impact of technical debt and the financial one. Both really relevant in the tech world today, but something that maybe is less focused on is the moral impact, and tech debt can frustrate teams when they want to push on and they want to succeed ultimately. Having technical debt in the way can often be obstructive to that, and it's just a nice way to think about it. I think as I represent the non-technical stakeholders here today, we can often have a 2D view, purely looking at the product from a financial perspective rather than a project perspective. Just to clarify there. So yeah, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, and certainly how it can cause some serious damage. So both people can be both people can maybe be at fault here for not understanding it. But let's move on to common challenges. What difficulties have you faced when trying to explain technical debt to non-technical stakeholders?
Yeah. So honestly, with this one, the primary issue I think is just business owners and stakeholders just not really appreciating and understanding the value in it. Again, just going back to what we were saying before, it's like you might have your development teams complaining and moaning about a whole bunch of stuff that's not going too well. They might be struggling with a component that is taking too long to load. The performance is really crappy, and that might just at that point a business owner might not necessarily know why does that affect me? Why is that important? And I think it's really good to have those conversations where we talk about some of those the risks of that, like, okay, well, it's performing slowly, but it's actually happening at the point where the user's trying to check out from the car. It's causing them to leave. They're going to competitors. That might make people start listening again. And I think on that point, it's kind of like lack of visible gains. It's like you might have a product that's working great, all the users are happy, it's performing really well, and so from your perspective, you don't have any tech debt. It's working great. But behind the scenes, the cracks could be forming, and that's the time when you should really be listening to the developers to find out what's important here, and could something bite us later when we really need it. And that's on the sort of stakeholder side. But on the development side, on the developer side, it's one of the other things I do notice, which is something worth being conscious of, is developers can sometimes mistake imperfect code as technical debt. So what I mean by that is, there might be personal preferences at play here. You might have a particular developer who's really not happy with the choice of a library that's being used, but it might just be a personal preference. They might then try and push to have this changed. So I think it's always worth anyone who's listening to sort of make sure that we asking the questions, like asking for justifications, because if the response is like, oh well, I don't really like this library, it's a bit crap. But if that's just a personal preference, then I think it's probably better to dig into that and justify it and figure out how important that is to fix. So ultimately, I think it's worth just sort of distinguishing the difference between what is imperfect and what is actually harmful to the project as a whole. And I think the other difficult challenge is trying to understand the importance, because some tech debt is really important to one group of people and it's totally different to another. So it might be a 10 out of 10 really serious bit of tech debt for the dev team, but it's a 1 out of 10 for the overall business. And it's about sort of communicating that and justifying it.
I think that's a really important point, and I was talking a bit before about the morale and financial, and I guess here it's the responsibility of both sides of the coin to open those lines of communication and be really transparent with each other, and only by having frank conversations, really communicating clearly and effectively for needs from both sides, can you really achieve that. The imperfect code, for example, is this actually as serious as it seems? Do we need to provide training? Are technical people communicating the right thing to non-technical people in the first place? It's not always, the one-way street. I think having that open line is really important. And I guess at one point I want to focus on here is could you share an example maybe of a situation where miscommunication about technical debt led to unexpected consequences?
Yep, I definitely can, and I think I was fully responsible for it as well. There might be a little bit probably less about a miscommunication and more the consequences of ignoring it. And this was a project I worked on a fair few years ago now, but obviously in the interest of speed and rushing things out the door, we were working on just adding a few new features to some data tables that we had scattered around the site, and there was a whole bunch of legacy tables, and they were slowly being replaced with better performing React data tables. And I think the policy at the time was anytime we come across one of those legacy tables and we need to make some changes to it, it would be good to just replace it there and then to start making improvements to those things. But because there was a time pressure, we needed to add what seemed like really simple changes to these data tables. So instead of replacing it with the new React ones, we added the new functionality on top of the legacy tables, with the idea, of course, to come back to it later. But we're only adding a simple thing. But then during testing, we realized there was a feature missing. And sure enough, we needed to add like an inline modal pop-up or something like that into the data tables. And sure enough, the legacy tables didn't support that. So it was either we couldn't get that to work without it breaking or being a massive hack. So sure enough, we ended up having to scrap everything that we'd done on the legacy tables, replace everything with the React tables in the first place, and then add in all the functionality. So it literally took us twice as long as it should have done. And that's just one of those examples of where it would have been better to communicate and justify and say, look, I need a little bit of extra time to rectify this tech debt, but it will be worth it because we won't have to, we're now actively reducing the tech debt, but also we're not stacking more functionality on something that's going to be replaced anyway. So it was one of those things where we kind of conceded to rushing things out the door, and we really should have just put the brakes on there. So yeah, I think that's probably the best example I have.
Yeah, and you mentioned quite a lot of like technical concepts there, but basically the decision was made to move forward, not cover yourself, and it came back to get you. So I just wanted to know maybe it's like how you would go about translating complex technical concepts like that into in terms that business oriented stakeholders could easily grasp.
Yep, definitely. I think, as we've said already, definitely using analogies is really good. Again, like talking about the cracks forming in the background, you might think you've got something working great. You might think you've got the best application in the world because it's you've got absolutely no tech debt. But if you've not actually had a conversation with your dev teams to figure this stuff out, if you've not been asking questions, then you might not know about all these cracks forming in the background. Just ready. Sometimes they can be like little bombs or like little traps that can go off at any moment, and usually, from my experience, it's always at the worst possible time. The other one is make sure that when we're communicating, this is both for development teams reporting things to stakeholders and vice versa, but just make sure that we talk about everything in an impact-orientated way. So instead of just complaining, saying this particular library we're using is shit, or like the performance is really crap, justify it. So just say like this component has been a real nightmare to maintain. We can't add new features to it. It's taken a bit longer. And instead of just complaining and being frustrated, actually just say, like, if we spent a little bit of time fixing this, then we could speed up the amount of feature development we do in this area by 2 times or something like that. Or again, like if it's so slow performance that's impacting a user on a shopping cart, it's like, well, the one place that you want your shopping cart to be the best is in when they're trying to check out. You don't want to lose them there. So and you don't want to lose users to competitors and things like that. So those try and justify like the reasons in a business way that the business is going to listen. But if it just comes across as like, I think it's mostly about making sure you don't just complain about problems, but you also offer a solution, offer some options, like because if it's just a rant, nobody's going to listen. But if it's like, why don't we do these, option 1 or option 2, and it's going to take this long, much easier for stakeholders to make a quick decision and say, okay, option 1 looks fine, let's do that. And that can form part of building a case. So help make a case for something I always say when everyone wants to raise something and be listened to is to put a doc together, list out the challenges and the risks, any potential options we could do to fix it, any justifications that need to be done. Don't just complain about it and expect someone to do something, because it could just be get lost in the noise of everything. And also use previous examples of tech debt being ignored if there is any. So, there might have been a time where someone reported some tech debt, it wasn't listened to, and then it did actually explode later on. You want to just make reference to that as well and put that into your justifications. Like, that time that the entire platform went down over the weekend before Christmas, you don't want that to happen again. So. So to talk about that sort of stuff, and then hopefully by that point you can have like much more healthy conversations and have feedback loops as well. If you're a non-technical stakeholder listening to dev teams raising these issues, like use feedback loops and replay back your understanding of what you think they're saying to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, particularly relaying it to a wider business objective. So it's to increase conversions, and people are dropping out the shopping cart. That's something that the wider team are all clued into. It's a wider business objective, and I think those can be really powerful. And in terms of translating these concepts, I think raises another point about collaboration, and you talk a lot about transparency and having those open lines of communication. So what strategies have you found effective in fostering a culture of transparency and collaboration between development teams and non-technical stakeholders?
Yep, the top one for me here is regular reviews and demos. So one of the things I've noticed that can be useful is when you get organise a demo session with stakeholders or the wider teams to see what we're working on, see how things are going. Because one of the things I've found is when you get on a call and you're doing some demos of something with a stakeholder that might be seeing something for the very first time, they might notice that what you're showing me here doesn't match the designs. They might have seen some really shiny designs that the design teams put together, and the end result hasn't looked the same. And I think that's a really good opportunity to start asking some questions like, well, why doesn't this look like how it was designed? And what you'll probably find is most of the time the answer will be, well, actually the dev team's been wrestling with a huge pile of tech debt with this stuff. It's actually been a huge headache to retrofit some of these new designs into these old legacy components that nobody's looked at for years. And so what you'll find is the dev teams have had to make some compromises and make some changes to still try and achieve something close to what they want, but it wasn't perfect, probably because they've been battling with the tech debt along the way, and that can be a really good opportunity to catch that and ask questions like, well, what can we do to avoid it the next time? What steps should we be taking to make this easier for the future? And they can start having some good conversations. And I think the other one as well is, so one of the things that I've been thinking about is, if you're a company that has a development team, whether it's an agency or your own internal team or something like that, one of the signals that will tell you that you've got a really good quality development team, and how you know that you've got a team that you can trust, is if any one of those developers are asking to see the product roadmap. Being transparent with the product roadmap is really useful, because if you've got a developer who's asking to see what's happening in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, the reason why they're asking for that is because their dev team will have a good understanding of where the tech debt lives in the application, and which stuff probably needs to be looked at. So if they know ahead of time that we're about to pile on a whole new set of functionality for a particular area of the code, they might think, well, we need to really manage some tech debt there. There's a bunch of stuff that's a bit messy. We wouldn't want to start stacking on new functionality without rectifying some of this stuff. And if those conversations are happening, then that's how you know you're in good hands with your development team. But it is also important to just make them all aware of what's coming up as soon as you can, because then you can start moving things around and start planning in some of the the rectifications and remedies for a lot of this stuff. And I think overall, just more stakeholder engagement with everyone, as much as you can, to ask questions. I think one of the advantages that we've had in the past is we've had the client had a good CTO on their side, who really valued the paying back technical debt. So he always made it his personal interest to make sure that all sprints that were planned had 1 or 2 days dedicated per sprint to just reviewing and rectifying technical debt to make sure it was being paid off. That kind of thing is super important, because if you're only focused on feature development, you're not gonna be paying it back, essentially. And I think the last one is just open lines of communication, and just promote no stupid questions kind of culture. That can just help have healthy conversations with this stuff.
Nice. I think you just mentioned there about that CTO you worked with, always dedicating a couple of days a week to the sprint, and that probably roughly works out at about 13.5 hours, which is like what developers are going to spend dealing with that time anyway, dealing with that technical debt anyway. So just giving the space, giving the allowance for it is a really positive thing to see, and obviously a hallmark of a great CTO. So we've talked a lot about challenges, and I probably want to move on to talking a little bit more about the positives. What are the long-term benefits of addressing technical debt, and how can it positively influence an organisation's ability to innovate and respond to market demands?
Yeah, so the main ones there, I think, is probably overall efficiency of the team, which will lead to more cost efficiency. So if something's supposed to take 3 days, you want to spend 3 days on it. But if you don't want it to end up being 3 weeks, because you're wrestling with all this other stuff you hadn't planned for, and that in turn can lead to just overall quicker feature development. So I think a lot of the time, especially in startups, you might not know what the right solution is. You might want to throw something together to get a bit of a proof of concept. You might want to just test the water with a particular idea, but then if it doesn't work, you want to be able to quickly adapt and be agile and change it out for something else. Like, oh, that's not working, let's do this other thing. But if every step of the way you're tripping over technical debt, you're not going to be doing stuff very quickly. And again, overall team morale will have a long-term benefit, because if you can keep a team a team in there for more long-term without having to retrain new staff every 6 months because everyone's so miserable, then that's going to be great, because you're going to be able to keep that stability for as long as you can. And then also easier staff onboarding. It's no good trying to onboard staff, especially if the turnover is really high, spending hours and hours training them about all these weird nuances that they've got to handle and also deal with the overall fear that if they change one line of code in one particular place, the whole thing crashes down like a house of cards. You're gonna have a bad time if that's the situation that you're in. And yeah, more long term, hopefully just more stability. and performance.
Nice way to sell the positivity there, Scott. No, seriously though, could you actually discuss the long-term benefits of prioritising technical debt reduction from both a technical and business perspective?
Yeah, so on the technical side, I've probably already covered quite a lot of this now, but I think the main thing for me that I always talk about with any decision that needs to be made is maintainability. You might, if you're writing a piece of code now, and you might fully understand what it's doing, but the future developer will not if it's not done in a maintainable way. And it's the same, you might have juniors onboarded onto that project as well. But even in the context of technical debt, it's all about maintainability. It's just you need to be able to read it and understand it at any time, and because if it's maintainable, then it's just easier to extend later and all that sort of stuff. And then it can lead to fewer bugs. So again, like I said earlier, if you feel like the dev team is spending most of their time putting hot fixes straight onto production, it's going down on a Sunday or whatever, then those might be signals that you need to start reviewing some of this stuff, and then it can increase also like faster development cycles, like we mentioned already, and also reduced complexity. If technical debt as it starts stacking up can just make code very complex and difficult to read and difficult to understand. So if you're getting on top of this, sometimes technical debt can actually just be as simple as just a really convoluted piece of code that just needs another pair of eyes to just change it around to make it easier, and that in itself can make a big impact. From the business side, quicker time to market. If you've got a feature or an idea, you just want to get out there really quickly. You want to spend the minimum amount of time. Well, you want to spend the required amount of time on getting that out there without wrestling with things you hadn't planned for. And overall, could just build trust with stakeholders, users, and customers. If someone's made a feature request for something that'll really help them, it'd be really cool if you could just get that out there really dead quickly. Like I sometimes see when products that I use, you make a suggestion on one of their sort of suggestion forums or whatever, and then like 3 days later the thing has been rolled out, and I always find that really impressive that someone's so organized and on top of things that they can just ship so fast, and that's kind of what that's probably what you're going to want. And I think overall long term, hopefully to just lower the costs in the long run.
Yeah, no, definitely. So those are really the long-term benefits, but I guess how do we get there? How do you go from this big scary cloud that looms all over all digital products, and how do you actually address that practically? So for the non-technical stakeholders tuning in, what actionable advice can you offer to help them better engage with technical debt discussions, to be a bit more intelligent about how they handle them?
Yeah, I think probably the first part there, I guess the most important thing here is you're already tuned into this chat, so that's the first thing that you can do to sort of start educate yourself on the basics, do some research, find out what it is, find out why it's important. But also I think just trust the technical teams. You've probably done a great deal of work with the teams that you've got already, and you should be able to trust them and rely on them for communicating this information. So just listen to your development teams, find out what's bothering them, try and figure out if it's something that's worth doing. Do a bit of a cost benefit analysis on some of that stuff, and make sure that that's all planned in. And regular team check-ins, just check in, ask questions. Figure out what the reasons, the justifications are for some of the complaints that are coming through, and yeah, just make sure there's feedback loops. Just talk, just have conversations. I think that's the main thing, really. Nice.
I think you mentioned a couple of these points already, but what steps can you do to proactively support the development teams in particular in managing and reducing technical debt?
Yeah. Number one, make sure that time is allocated for addressing it and refactoring it. Like we said there before, having a CTO or someone in the product team respect this and understand it and make sure that there's dedicated time or budget available. And it could be, whatever the team maybe agrees is reasonable. Maybe it's 2 days per sprint. Maybe it's more, but make sure it's there and start creating a backlog of some of this stuff. And then prioritize it, work with the team together, work with all the stakeholders together to figure out which of these items are not that important. Or maybe they are important, but we don't need to worry about it for the next 12 months. But there's some other stuff that's actually causing a lot of headaches for the team right now. Let's push that to the top. The other one is carry out regular third-party audits if you can, which is something that we do. I've done many of them now, and I've seen some shit. I've seen some horrors. It's so hilarious to me that like someone's like, oh, can you just have a look at this project, and is it something that you'll be happy to maintain? And then when I check it, it's the biggest pile of horrors I've ever seen, and it's loaded full of security vulnerabilities, and I just wouldn't touch it like immediately. And it's fascinating to me that up to that point they've had this product running for 5+ years and they didn't even know how bad it was. But the other thing that's useful for the audits is reviewing the feedback, because that might also, you might see patterns in there that can help detect where you might need to do training for the team. So you might find that like across all of your products, the dev teams are making the same mistakes. Like maybe they make it writing code that is just a little bit too coupled together and it's difficult to maintain. Maybe it's really fragile. These are all fixable problems, and you might detect those patterns when you're reviewing the results of those audits. So definitely investing in training, but using the audits to drive and prioritize that training can really help. And then also just make sure that your teams are doing regular reviews and code audits and automated testing. Most important thing that people don't, it took me a long time, to be fair, to really appreciate the value of automated testing and unit tests, because I didn't really get it, because nobody had actually communicated to me like the value of it. But the main reason why we'd want to have good quality automated tests and unit tests is when you do get round to refactoring some code. So most of the time when you're refactoring code, you don't want to actually change the functionality. So you actually just want to refactor that code and not break anything. And if you don't have unit tests, then what actually ends up happening is the dev teams are going to be too scared to change anything, because they don't want to bring the system offline, and they've got no way of validating if it's going to work, because it's, maybe there's some features that are too hard to test, that kind of thing. And I think the other one is make sure that we've got good documentation and code standards in place, because you might find that developers are making common mistakes that are actually just policy driven or just lack of standards, basically.
Yeah. No, that's those are some great tips. So I think we're just going to start to wrap up here. So just to summarise, for everybody now, in your experience, how can understanding and effectively communicating technical debt lead to an improved decision making and outcomes for startups and SMEs? Yeah. So just to summarise some of that, really. Obviously, all of this is going to be helpful for both short-term and long-term health of your product or your suite of apps, and so it's just about having those important conversations with everyone and start talking about it now. If you're sitting there knowing that you've got an application out in the wild and it's been running for 5-6 years and you've never thought about technical debt before until now, start asking those questions. Start speaking to your team and find out what's happening. Make sure you expose to them a roadmap, like tell them what your plan is for the future, and they could probably tell you pretty quickly if that's going to be a problem or not. And also it's just a benefit for the staff morale and staff retention. You want to have a little bit of stability in the team. If people keep moving around all the time, then when you do get new staff and juniors or anything like that into the team, that's just going to continue to add more tech debt to it while they're trying to navigate and figure out what's going on. And overall, it should just lead to better risk mitigation and stability and growth into the future. But I think the main takeaway really should be that like tech debt is normal. It's not like this evil thing that needs to be, you don't need to drop down tools immediately and stop doing everything. It is normal. And I think for me, all software becomes tech debt eventually if you leave it long enough. Even if you're writing the best code possible right now, but you're using out of date or already deprecated tools, then it's already tech debt. So you don't, and I think for me, what brings me a little bit of peace with that is I don't try and write the most perfect code first time, because I know it's probably going to be replaced or deprecated in the next 3 years, and that's the right thing. That's the healthy thing that should happen.
so don't worry about trying to do, reach for perfection. It's not gonna get you there. But if you are making decisions on actively putting some, letting tech debt accrue, then just make sure that we've got a plan in place and everyone's aware of it, and we can start rectifying it at the right time when it matters.
No, that's absolutely grand and really insightful, Scott. Thank you very much. So I think that's the wrap on the questions. I am going to try. Does anybody have any questions at all? I know there's a raise hand functionality. This is our first time using audio events on LinkedIn. So we have got somebody raising their hand there. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to give this a go, and I'll try and get that over to you if you can't quite hear it, Scott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't hear anything. So.
Hello.
Hello there. Hi. What's your question?
Hi. My name is Mugadifa. So I'm a software developer and a researcher. Basically, I'm looking at how can I be able to identify to craft a framework that enables young develop teams such as students to identify feature and be able to minimize technical debt as early as possible before they become pros or before they go into businesses, so that they are able not to extend a technical debt from school, then they bring it into professional world. How can I handle that? Because that's the research I'm carrying out basically.
So just to clarify there, your point was how do you teach to spot it before it becomes a problem?
Basically, I want it to be handled as early as possible before it. Of course, we can't solve it 100%, but minimize it as early as possible. How do I ensure that this framework enables students to do this?
Okay, you can take that, Scott.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's kind of depends. So sometimes a lot of tech debt, like I said, is kind of normal and unavoidable, and there's different reasons for it. So like it might be if there's a specific instruction to go fast, then that creating some tech debt is kind of unavoidable. But there's the other side of it, which is maybe the tech debt is because you had certain members of the team that weren't as qualified, or they weren't as skilled in some areas, and they've just simply wrote code that is just not as maintainable. So if it's the second thing, if it's just that you want to make sure that everyone's writing better code straight away, then that's just down really to training and in a code review process. Make sure that you've got a good code review process that's checking this stuff. Works really well for us because it means you can have anyone on the team, a junior or anything like that, review, and you can have a senior provide the feedback, and immediately you can say, don't do that, or actually this class is too long, or this needs to be decoupled a little bit more, or you need to write a unit test for that. That's the main thing that can sort of stop that happening in its tracks. And then you can also use those code reviews as a way of signaling where you need to have training. So maybe you just need to get developers on training on how to write better, more maintainable code and all that kind of thing. And if it is technical debt that is caused by just moving fast and breaking stuff, then the only way to really rectify that is to make sure that the company as a whole is doing regular code audits to review, and also allowing the teams themselves time to review and feedback on where the technical debt might live, and in fixing it that way, make sure that there's sort of enough time to fix these things. But also one last point, I suppose, is kind of avoid over optimization and over engineering solutions. So just make sure that it's the right solution, for the right job, because that can also lead, from my experience, a lot of tech debt where you might have a developer that's trying to be too clever or trying to over predict certain functionality that actually makes the code harder to read and harder to maintain. And maybe one last point is just making sure that the dev team themselves are staying up to date. So just promote continuous learning with the team. Make sure that everyone's up to date with the latest things, because if we're all supposed to be using the next version of React, is the whole team up to speed with some of the new documentation, or are they going to be writing out of date code? That kind of thing. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it really helps. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you for your question. Okay, we're just going to ask Rahul now. What's your question?
Yeah. Hello, thank you. So I don't have a question as such, but just wanted to add to few things which already has been answered. So I have, since we are running out of time, I have added a comment to the audience, and I think such sessions are very wonderful in order to get across the point to non-technical stakeholders. And usually these conversations start with a you or me kind of attitude, wherein non-technical stakeholders don't see value in what we are doing, and as a technical stakeholder or a developer or a project manager, we need to emphasize why those things are particularly necessary for the success of project and for the organization as a whole. And usually these conversations end with a common ground, with a us attitude. So I think I have listed the points in the comments which I wanted to talk about. Thanks so much for hosting this session. Thanks a lot.
Great, no, thank you.
No, I agree with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we've got Tristan. I'm just going to move you into speaking. Okay, Tristan, what's your question?
Hey there. Maybe it tied back into the question before of linking this to other people outside of sort of dev teams, maybe stakeholders or senior management. How do you suggest approaching this the technical debt? Is it the sort of thing that you recommend having a percentage of time per sprint is always done this? It's almost like health and safety. There's always going to be 3 hours of technical debt done, or there's some sort of time frame that it's just always included, or do you work more towards maybe a threshold of going, let's have at least one project per this lifetime of a project, so that you're sort of scaling it against how long a project has been running? Thank you.
Great question, Scott.
Yeah, no, that is a good question. I think it's not a very exciting answer, but I think the only answer I could give there is it kind of depends on the team, depends on the scale of the project. But I would probably rely on taking some steer from the team on that one. For for one of our projects, 2 days per sprint was absolutely perfect, but that was something that the team themselves asked for, and they used that time in a way so it's just they already knew ahead of time. So I think one of the things that they were doing was they were creating a backlog of tech debt already. Just whenever they see it, we sort of promoted this kind of culture of if you see something that needs to be fixed but you don't have time to fix it right now, or it's a bigger problem, make sure you log it as a ticket, and it can be backlogged, prioritized and refined, and then estimated and all that sort of stuff. So the part of those that time was just spent going through the backlog, making sure that we've prioritized them and everyone was happy with them, and then once it's all estimated up, that 2 days per sprint was enough to just sort of to start ticking through some of that stuff. But that worked well for us because we didn't the tech debt there was like refactor this class to this other thing, make this code a little bit better, or remove some code that is no longer needed but we never had time to remove. You might have more serious issues, in which case a better solution might actually be have like a full dedicated sprint to just tech debt. It kind of just depends on, the main thing was just having a backlog of tech debt with estimates on it, so you can look and think, wow, there's the highest, really high priority things here that actually impact the roadmap for some of the stuff that's coming up, and it's actually going to take 2-3 weeks to sort all of that out. Maybe you could try and negotiate getting 1 or 2 sprints of just getting through that. But I think the main thing is just decide together what is best for the team, and then try and get some time or budget agreed to work through that. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've done it before where we've flagged some issues that people could do in their 20% time if they wanted to pick one of them up. But I think putting it more into the process, just you find developers either want to run away from technical debt, or they just want to be doing it all the time, because it's just let's make it better. I think that's that art of trying to work out where's the right level to work at it.
Yeah, no, you're completely right, and it's definitely a balance, and it's a hard balance to find. you just, because you need to basically ask the question is like, is it just about perfection? Is this an imperfect bit of code and that's all it is? And is it just an opinion piece? Or is it actually harmful? Is it actually like maybe you can use metrics or something like that, but is this thing harmful now or will it be harmful in the future? And then if it is, that's probably tech debt. But actually, if it's just because there's someone in the development team is just a bit upset with the way that the code is formatted or the way that a certain library is being chosen that they don't agree with, but everything still works perfectly fine and it's maintainable and that library is not deprecated, then it's probably not tech debt. It's just something that could be slightly improved. And there's probably still nothing wrong with fixing those things, but maybe that stuff can go into a different pot of like nice to have improvements versus actual harmful tech debt.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Tristan. So if there are any more questions or any points that you'd like to clarify, feel free to reach out to Scott or myself. You can also get in touch with the team via email or contact us via our website. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening today. We have recorded this audio event, so you can listen back to it. Conversely, if you weren't able to make it, you'll be able to catch this on our YouTube channel. So yeah, you can catch it there. But thank you everyone for listening, wherever you are. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will hopefully see you at one of our next events. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.